The midnight air felt like knives against her skin as Marlene Norton stumbled through the darkness, her swollen belly making every step a painful negotiation with gravity. She had been walking for what felt like hours since the stagecoach driver had kicked her off near the Texas border, refusing to let a pregnant woman without proper fare continue to El Paso. Her thin cotton dress provided almost no protection against the November wind that swept across the plains outside Shafter, Texas, and her teeth chattered so violently she feared they might crack. She collapsed finally beside an outcropping of rocks, too exhausted to go another step, and curled herself as tightly as her condition would allow, pressing her hands against her stomach where her unborn child kicked weakly. The cold was relentless, seeping into her bones until she could barely feel her fingers or toes. At 19 years old, alone and abandoned by the man who had promised her the world before disappearing into the night 5 months ago, Marlene had never felt more helpless. She closed her eyes and tried to pray, but the words would not come. Instead, she focused on breathing, on surviving just one more minute, then another, wondering if this God-forsaken stretch of land between nowhere and nothing would be where her story ended before it had truly begun. She must have drifted into unconsciousness, because the next thing she knew, warm hands were touching her shoulder, gently shaking her awake. Her eyes fluttered open to see a man's face illuminated by moonlight, his features shadowed but his eyes reflecting genuine concern. He wore a wide-brimmed hat and a heavy coat that looked like it had seen better days, and when he spoke, his voice carried the soft drawl of someone who had spent his entire life under the Texas sun. "Madam, you cannot stay out here," he said, his tone urgent but kind. "You will freeze to death before morning comes." Marlene tried to speak, but her jaw was locked from the cold. All she could manage was a weak whimper. The man did not hesitate. He shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders, then scooped her up into his arms with surprising gentleness, despite his obvious strength. She wanted to protest, to tell him she could walk, but her body betrayed her with its weakness, and she found herself leaning into his warmth like a moth drawn to flame. "My camp is just over that ridge," he said, already moving with purposeful strides. "I have a fire going and hot coffee. You are going to be all right, madam. I promise you that." The walk could not have been more than 5 minutes, but to Marlene, it felt like an eternity of fading in and out of awareness. When they reached his camp, she saw he had not been exaggerating. A healthy fire crackled in a ring of stones, and nearby stood a sturdy-looking horse tied to a scraggly tree. The man set her down carefully near the fire, close enough to feel its warmth but not so close as to be dangerous, and immediately began adding more wood to build up the flames. "My name is Jacob Quinn," he said as he worked, not looking at her but keeping up a steady stream of conversation as if he understood she needed the sound of a human voice. "I am a ranch hand, or I was until last week when the outfit I worked for went under. Been making my way south, looking for work. Lucky for you, I decided to camp here tonight instead of pushing on to Shafter." Marlene's shivers began to subside as the fire's heat seeped into her body. She pulled his coat tighter around herself and finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a rasp. "Thank you." Jacob turned to look at her properly for the first time, and in the firelight she could see him more clearly. He was perhaps 24 or 25, with brown hair that fell just past his collar and a face that was handsome in a weathered, honest way. His eyes were a pale blue that seemed to catch and hold the firelight, and when he smiled at her, it reached all the way to those eyes, crinkling the corners in a way that suggested he smiled often. "No need to thank me for doing what any decent person would do," he said. "But you are welcome all the same." He moved to his saddlebags and pulled out a tin cup and a small pot. "Let me get you some coffee. It is not much, but it will warm you from the inside." As he poured the dark liquid into the cup and handed it to her, his fingers brushed hers, and Marlene felt a jolt that had nothing to do with the cold. She took the cup gratefully and sipped, not caring that it burned her tongue slightly. The bitter warmth spread through her chest, and she sighed with relief. "I am Marlene Norton," she said after a moment. "I was on a stagecoach, but the driver made me get off when I could not pay the full fare. I thought I could walk to the next town, but I did not realize how far it was or how cold it would get." Jacob's expression darkened. He left a pregnant woman alone in the middle of nowhere at night. That is lower than a snake's belly. He shook his head in disgust, then seemed to catch himself. "Forgive me, madam, that was crude." "It was accurate," Marlene said, and despite everything, she felt a small smile tug at her lips. "And please call me Marlene. After you saved my life, I think we can dispense with formalities." "Then you must call me Jacob," he replied. He settled down on the opposite side of the fire, giving her space but staying close enough to help if she needed it. "If you do not mind my asking, where were you headed?" Marlene hesitated, then decided there was no point in lying. What did she have left to protect anyway? "El Paso. I have a cousin there who said she would take me in until the baby comes. After that, I suppose I will figure something out." "You are traveling alone?" Jacob asked, and she could hear the unspoken question in his voice. "The baby's father left when I told him I was carrying his child," Marlene said flatly. "Turns out his promises meant about as much as morning mist. My parents turned me out when they found out, said I had brought shame on the family. So yes, I am alone." Jacob was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke again, his voice was gentle. "I am sorry that happened to you. No woman should have to face that alone." "Well, I am facing it," Marlene said, and she heard the bitterness in her own voice. "Not much choice in the matter now." "There is always a choice," Jacob said. "Maybe not about what has already happened, but about what comes next." He met her eyes across the flames. "You will always be warm with me, for tonight at least, and tomorrow I will take you to Shafter. It is not El Paso, but there is a doctor there, and a boarding house run by a good woman named Mrs. Patterson. She will not turn you away." Marlene felt tears prick at her eyes, the first she had allowed herself to shed in weeks. The kindness in his voice, the simple decency of his offer, broke something open inside her that she had been keeping carefully locked away. "Why are you being so kind to me? You do not even know me." Jacob smiled again, that warm smile that seemed to light up his entire face. "I do not need to know your whole life story to know that you deserve kindness. Besides, my mother raised me to believe that how we treat people in their darkest moments says everything about who we are." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman," Marlene said softly. "She was," Jacob said, and there was a note of sadness in his voice. "She passed 2 years ago. Fever took her quick. My father went a year later. I think he died of a broken heart as much as anything else. They were married for 30 years and loved each other right up to the end." "I am sorry for your loss," Marlene said, and she meant it. She could hear the love in his voice when he spoke of his parents, the kind of love she had once hoped to find for herself. "Thank you," Jacob said. "I miss them every day, but I am grateful I had them as long as I did. They taught me what matters in this life." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling up into the night sky. "Now, you should try to get some rest. You are safe here, I give you my word. I will keep the fire going and keep watch." Marlene wanted to argue that he needed rest too, but exhaustion was pulling at her like an undertow. The warmth of the fire, the coffee in her belly, and the feeling of safety his presence provided all combined to make her eyelids impossibly heavy. She lay down carefully, using his coat as a pillow and curling on her side near the fire. "Jacob," she murmured, already half asleep. "Yes. Thank you for everything. Sleep, Marlene. Everything will look better in the morning light." She drifted off with the sound of the crackling fire and the knowledge that for the first time in months, she was not completely alone. When Marlene woke, the sun was already well up in the sky, and the smell of cooking meat made her stomach growl loudly. She sat up, momentarily disoriented, then remembered where she was. Jacob was crouched by the fire, turning what looked like rabbit on a makeshift spit. He glanced over when he heard her move. "Good morning," he said cheerfully. "I hope you do not mind, but I caught us some breakfast." "Figured you could use a proper meal." Marlene's mouth watered. She could not remember the last time she had eaten meat. "Mind? I think I could kiss you for that rabbit." Jacob laughed, a rich sound that made something warm unfurl in Marlene's chest. "Well, save your kisses. This rabbit is not much to look at, but it should fill our bellies." They ate in comfortable silence, tearing the meat from the bones with their fingers. It was perhaps the most delicious thing Marlene had ever tasted, though she knew that was probably just the hunger talking. When they had finished, Jacob carefully doused the fire and began packing up his camp with practiced efficiency. "Shafter is about 6 miles west," he said. "Do you think you can ride? You can take my horse and I will walk alongside." "I can ride," Marlene said, though in truth she was not sure. Her body ached from sleeping on the ground, and her belly made mounting a horse more complicated than it once was. But she would not ask this man who had already done so much for her to walk 6 miles while she rode. Jacob seemed to sense her hesitation. "Tell you what," he said. "Why don't we both ride? My horse is strong enough to carry us both, and it will be faster that way, if that is all right with you." Marlene nodded, relieved. "Thank you." Jacob mounted first, then reached down to help her up. She placed her foot in the stirrup and his hand gripped hers firmly, pulling her up behind him. It took some maneuvering to get settled with her belly, but finally she was seated, her arms wrapped around his waist to keep her balance. She could feel the solid warmth of him through his shirt, and despite herself, she felt a flutter that had nothing to do with the baby. They set off at an easy walk, the morning sun warming them as they traveled. The landscape around them was harsh and beautiful, all scrubby brush and red earth, with mountains rising in the distance. Jacob pointed out landmarks as they went, keeping up a steady stream of conversation that helped pass the time. "That is Eagle Peak to the north," he said, gesturing with his free hand. "And if you look real close to the west, you can see the smoke from Shafter's chimneys. We will be there before noon." "Have you been to Shafter before?" Marlene asked. "A few times," Jacob said. "It is a mining town, mostly silver. Not as big as some, but the people are decent enough. Mrs. Patterson, the woman I mentioned, she runs a boarding house on the main street. I stayed there once a few years back when I was passing through. She is a widow, lost her husband in a mining accident, but she is tough as nails and has a good heart." "Will she really take me in?" Marlene asked, trying to keep the doubt from her voice. "I do not have much money." "She will," Jacob said with confidence. "And if money is a concern, well, I have a little saved up. Enough to cover a few nights at least, until we can figure something else out." "I cannot let you do that," Marlene protested. "You have already done so much." "You cannot stop me from spending my own money how I see fit," Jacob said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Besides, consider it an investment. Once you are settled in El Paso with your cousin, you can pay me back if it makes you feel better." Marlene rested her forehead against his back, overwhelmed by his generosity. "I will pay you back," she said quietly. "I promise." "I know you will," Jacob said, "but there is no rush. First things first, we get you somewhere safe and warm and we get you seen by a doctor. Everything else can wait." As they rode, Marlene found herself noticing things about Jacob. The way he sat easy in the saddle, completely at home on horseback, the kindness in his voice every time he spoke to her, the way his hands held the reins with confidence but gentleness. She had known him for less than a day, but already she felt safer with him than she had felt in months. It was a dangerous feeling, she knew. The last time she had trusted a man, it had ended in disaster. But something told her Jacob was different. His kindness felt genuine, not calculated. He expected nothing from her, except that she take care of herself and her baby. They crested a low hill, and suddenly Shafter spread out before them. It was not a large town, maybe a few hundred people at most, but to Marlene, it looked like civilization after days of nothing but wilderness and rough stage-coach stops. The main street was wide and dusty, lined with wooden buildings that had the weathered look of structures that had to endure the harsh West Texas climate. She could see a general store, a saloon, what looked like a church, and several other businesses she could not quite make out from this distance. "There," Jacob said, pointing to a two-story building near the center of town. "That is Mrs. Patterson's place. The sign is hard to see from here, but trust me, that is it." They rode down the main street, drawing curious looks from the people they passed. Marlene tried to ignore the stares, knowing what they were likely thinking. A pregnant woman riding with a man who clearly was not her husband. She could imagine the gossip already starting, but she was too tired to care. Let them think what they wanted. She knew the truth, and so did Jacob, and that was enough. Jacob stopped the horse in front of the boarding house and dismounted, then helped Marlene down carefully. Her legs were shaky after the ride, and she had to grip his arm for a moment to steady herself. He did not seem to mind, simply holding her elbow until she found her balance. "Wait here," he said. "I will go talk to Mrs. Patterson." He disappeared inside, and Marlene stood in the morning sun, one hand pressed to her lower back where an ache had started during the ride. She watched the townspeople go about their business, trying not to feel self-conscious about her stained dress and disheveled appearance. She must look like exactly what she was, a woman down on her luck with nowhere else to go. Jacob emerged a few minutes later with a woman who could only be Mrs. Patterson. She was perhaps 50 years old, with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and a face that looked like it rarely smiled. But when she looked at Marlene, her expression softened. "Poor dear," she said, coming down the steps. "Jacob told me what happened. That stage driver should be ashamed of himself. Come inside, child. You look dead on your feet." "Thank you, madam," Marlene said, her voice cracking slightly. "I appreciate your kindness." "No thanks needed," Mrs. Patterson said briskly. "I have a room on the first floor that should suit you just fine. It is small but clean, and you will not have to manage stairs with that belly. Come on now." Marlene followed her inside, with Jacob bringing up the rear. The boarding house was clean and smelled of lye soap and something that might have been beef stew. Mrs. Patterson led them down a short hallway to a door near the back of the house. She opened it to reveal a small room with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window that looked out on an alley. It was plain, but to Marlene, it looked like paradise. "The necessary is out back," Mrs. Patterson said. "Meals are served in the dining room at 7 in the morning, noon, and 6 in the evening. I expect my boarders to keep their rooms tidy and to conduct themselves with decency." "Do you have any questions?" "How much is the rent?" Marlene asked, dreading the answer. "Jacob has already settled up for a week," Mrs. Patterson said. "After that we can discuss arrangements. Now I imagine you would like to wash up. I will have my girl bring you some hot water and a clean dress. You look about the same size as my daughter before she married and moved to Austin. I kept some of her old clothes, and I am sure she would not mind you having one." Marlene felt tears threaten again. You are too kind. I am practical, Mrs. Patterson corrected, but her voice was gentle. Now you rest. Jacob, the doctor's office is 2 buildings down if you want to fetch him. I will do that right now, Jacob said. He looked at Marlene. Will you be all right here? Yes, Marlene said. Thank you, Jacob, for everything. He tipped his hat to her, and there was something in his eyes that made her heart skip. I will be back soon. After he left, Mrs. Patterson helped Marlene sit on the bed. That is a good man, she said, straightening the thin quilt. You are lucky he found you when he did. I know, Marlene said softly. I do not know how I will ever repay him. Something tells me he is not looking for repayment, Mrs. Patterson said with a knowing look. Now you rest. I will be back with that water and dress shortly. Left alone, Marlene lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Everything had happened so fast. Just yesterday morning, she had been on that stagecoach, terrified and uncertain about her future. Last night, she had nearly frozen to death. And now she was here, in a clean room in a boarding house in Shafter, Texas, thanks to the kindness of a cowboy she had just met. It seemed impossible, like something out of a story. But the ache in her body and the baby moving in her womb reminded her it was all too real. She thought about Jacob, about the way he had built up that fire last night and told her she would always be warm with him. At the time, she had thought he just meant for the night, but now she wondered if he had meant something more. The way he looked at her, the care he showed, it was more than just common decency. But she could not let herself hope for that. She had made that mistake before, believing a man's kind words and gentle touches, and look where it had gotten her. Still, something about Jacob felt different. The man who had gotten her pregnant had been all flash and charm, making grand promises while never quite looking her in the eye. Jacob was solid and steady, and when he made a promise, she believed he meant to keep it. That kind of integrity was rare, especially in her experience. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Patterson entered with a young girl who could not have been more than 15, carrying a pitcher of steaming water and a bundle of cloth that must be the promised dress. They set everything on the washstand, and Mrs. Patterson handed her a sliver of soap. Take your time, she said. Dinner will be at noon if you feel up to joining us. After they left, Marlene struggled out of her dirty dress and used the water and soap to wash away days of grime and travel. It felt wonderful to be clean again. The dress Mrs. Patterson had provided was simple calico, a bit worn but still serviceable, and it fit reasonably well despite her pregnancy. She was just finishing pinning up her hair when another knock came at the door. Come in, she called. Jacob entered with an older man who carried a black leather bag. This is Dr. Henderson, Jacob said. He agreed to come right away. Dr. Henderson was a thin man with spectacles and a grave demeanor. He set his bag on the washstand and turned to Jacob. If you will excuse us, young man, I need to examine the patient. Of course, Jacob said. He looked at Marlene. I will be right outside if you need anything. The examination was thorough and professional. Dr. Henderson listened to the baby's heartbeat with his stethoscope, felt her belly carefully, and asked numerous questions about her health and the pregnancy. Finally, he stepped back and packed away his instruments. You and the baby are both healthy, considering what you have been through, he said. But you need rest and proper nutrition. No more traveling for at least a few weeks, and after that, only if absolutely necessary. When is your baby due? Late January or early February, Marlene said. I am not exactly certain. I would guess you have about 2.5 months left, the doctor said. You should stay in Shafter until after the baby comes. Traveling in your condition is dangerous, especially with winter coming on. Marlene's heart sank. Staying meant finding a way to support herself, and she had no idea how she would do that. I understand. Mrs. Patterson is a good woman, Dr. Henderson said, as if reading her thoughts. She will help you figure things out. And that young man waiting outside seems quite devoted to your welfare. He is just being kind, Marlene said quickly. Maybe so, the doctor said. But I have lived long enough to recognize when someone cares. Now I am prescribing rest and good food. Follow that prescription and you should be fine. He paused at the door. And Miss Norton, try not to worry so much. Worry is bad for both you and the baby. Things have a way of working out. After he left, Jacob came back in. What did the doctor say? That I should not travel until after the baby comes, Marlene said, unable to keep the worry from her voice. Which means I need to find a way to earn money to pay for this room and food. But I do not know what kind of work I can do in my condition. Jacob pulled over the room's single chair and sat down facing her. Listen, I have been thinking. I need to find work anyway, and Shafter seems as good a place as any. There are mines here, and where there are mines, there are horses and livestock that need tending. I have experience with both. Maybe I can find something steady. That still does not solve my problem, Marlene said. Actually, I have an idea about that too, Jacob said. I talked to Mrs. Patterson while waiting for the doctor. She says the woman who did her laundry moved away last month, and she has been struggling to keep up with it herself. She needs help with washing and ironing, and she is willing to pay. It is not much, but it would at least cover your room and board. I can do laundry, Marlene said, hope rising in her chest. I am not afraid of hard work. I know you are not, Jacob said warmly. Mrs. Patterson said you can start tomorrow if you are feeling up to it. Today, you should just rest like the doctor said. Marlene looked at him, this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she had not even known how to pray. Why are you doing all this for me, Jacob? You do not owe me anything. Jacob was quiet for a moment, his blue eyes serious. When I found you last night, so cold and alone, something in me just knew I had to help you. Not because I owed you anything, but because it was the right thing to do. And this morning, when we rode here together and you told me about what happened to you, I got angry. Not at you, but at all the people who should have stood by you and did not. Your parents, the baby's father, that stage driver, you deserved better from all of them. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. My parents taught me that real strength is not about how tough you are or how fast you can draw a gun. It is about standing up for people who need standing up for. It is about doing what is right even when it is hard. You needed help, and I was there to give it. It is as simple as that. It is not simple at all, Marlene said softly. Most people would have ridden right past me last night. Then most people are fools, Jacob said. Marlene, I know you have been hurt. I know you have reasons not to trust. But I hope you will trust me, at least a little. I am not going anywhere. Not until I know you and your baby are safe and settled. Marlene felt something shift inside her, like a door that had been locked tight slowly beginning to open. I do trust you, she said, and realized it was true. I do not know why, but I do. Jacob smiled. That is enough for now. The rest will come with time. He stood up. I am going to go see about finding work. You rest, and I will check on you later. After he left, Marlene did try to rest, but her mind was too full. She thought about everything that had led her to this moment. 9 months ago, she had been a different person, a girl who still believed in fairy tales and happy endings. She had met Thomas Garrett at a dance in Fort Worth, and he had swept her off her feet with his charm and his promises. He had told her he loved her, that he wanted to marry her, and foolishly she had believed him. She had given him everything, her heart, her body, her trust. And when she told him she was pregnant, he had looked at her like she was something dirty, something shameful. He had left town the next day, and she had not heard from him since. Her parents' reaction had been even worse. Her father had called her a disgrace, and her mother had cried like Marlene had died. They had given her a little money and told her to leave, to go somewhere else and not bring shame on the family name. She had left Fort Worth with her small bag of belongings and the address of her cousin in El Paso, the only person who had shown her any kindness. But she had not counted on running out of money before she reached El Paso. She had not counted on that stage driver's cruelty. She had not counted on nearly freezing to death in the Texas wilderness. And she certainly had not counted on Jacob Quinn. She fell asleep thinking about him, about the firelight reflecting in his eyes and the warmth of his voice when he said she would always be warm with him. Over the next several days, Marlene settled into a routine at the boarding house. True to her word, Mrs. Patterson set her to work on the laundry, a task that was hard and tedious but honest. Marlene found she did not mind the work. It gave her something to focus on besides her worries, and Mrs. Patterson was a fair employer, never asking more than Marlene could reasonably manage in her condition. Jacob found work at one of the mines, not working underground but tending to the horses and mules that pulled the ore wagons. The pay was decent, and more importantly, it was steady. He moved into a room at the boarding house as well, just down the hall from Marlene's, and they fell into a pattern of eating meals together and talking in the evenings. Marlene learned that Jacob had grown up on a ranch in Central Texas, that he loved horses more than just about anything, and that his dream was to someday have a small ranch of his own. He told her stories about his parents, about growing up with 3 older sisters who had tormented him mercilessly, but loved him fiercely, and about the various jobs he had held since striking out on his own at 18. In turn, she told him about her life in Fort Worth, about her dreams of becoming a teacher before everything had fallen apart, and about her fears for the future. Jacob listened to all of it without judgment, and slowly, Marlene felt herself beginning to heal from the wounds Thomas Garrett and her parents had inflicted. One evening in late November, they were sitting on the boarding house's front porch, wrapped in blankets against the chill. The sun was setting in a blaze of orange and red, painting the sky in colors so vivid they almost hurt to look at. "I have been thinking," Jacob said carefully, "about your situation." Marlene tensed. "What about it?" "Well, the doctor said you should not travel until after the baby comes, and even then, it will be difficult with a newborn. Winter is going to make it even harder. By the time you could safely travel to El Paso, it might be spring." "I know," Marlene said quietly. She had been thinking the same thing, worrying about it late at night when she could not sleep. "What if you stayed in Shafter?" Jacob asked. "Not just until the baby comes, but longer, maybe permanently." Marlene turned to look at him. "Why would I do that?" Jacob met her eyes steadily. "Because I am here. Because you have work and a safe place to live. Because this could be a fresh start for you and your baby." "Jacob," Marlene said carefully, "you have done so much for me already. I cannot ask you to keep looking out for me indefinitely." "You are not asking," Jacob said. "I am offering. Marlene, these past few weeks, getting to know you, spending time with you, it has meant something to me, something important." He took a deep breath. "I care about you, more than I probably should, considering we have only known each other a short time, but I cannot help how I feel." Marlene's heart was pounding. "Jacob, I am pregnant with another man's child. I come with nothing but trouble and complications. You could find someone else, someone without my problems." "I do not want someone else," Jacob said simply. "I want you." "I know you are not ready to hear that yet, and I am not asking you to feel the same way. I am just asking you to think about staying. Give Shafter a chance. Give us a chance to see what this could be." Marlene looked out at the fading sunset, her mind whirling. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to grab onto this offer of stability and caring with both hands. But another part of her was terrified. She had trusted before, and it had ended in disaster. How could she be sure Jacob was different? "I need time to think about it," she said finally. "Take all the time you need," Jacob said. "I am not going anywhere." They sat in silence for a while longer, watching the last light fade from the sky. Despite the cold, Marlene felt warm, wrapped in the blanket and in the knowledge that someone cared about her, truly cared, without expecting anything in return. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Marlene thought about Jacob's offer. Staying in Shafter would mean giving up on her plan to go to El Paso, but was that really such a loss? Her cousin had offered her a place to stay out of obligation, not love. She barely knew the woman. Here in Shafter, she had work and a place to live. She had Mrs. Patterson, who was gruff but kind in her way. And she had Jacob, who had saved her life. Jacob, who made her laugh with his stories and feel safe with his steady presence. Jacob, who looked at her like she was something precious, despite her swollen belly and tangled circumstances. She was not in love with him, not yet, but she could feel herself heading in that direction, like a river flowing inevitably toward the sea. The question was whether she was brave enough to let herself fall. December arrived with unseasonably cold weather, and Marlene was grateful to be indoors and not traveling. Her belly had grown even larger, and some days just getting out of bed felt like a monumental task. Mrs. Patterson cut back her work hours without reducing her pay, insisting that she needed rest more than she needed to scrub sheets. Jacob continued to be a steady presence in her life. He brought her little gifts, things he picked up in town. A peppermint stick from the general store. A book of poetry someone at the mine was selling. A soft blanket he had bought from a traveling merchant, saying he thought she might need it for the baby. These small kindnesses touched Marlene more than any grand gesture could have. One afternoon in mid-December, Marlene was sitting in her room, sewing baby clothes from fabric Mrs. Patterson had given her, when Mrs. Patterson herself knocked on the door. "You have a visitor," she said. "A woman. Says her name is Clara Newsome and that you are cousins." Marlene's hand stilled on the fabric. "Clara, here. Please show her in." The woman who entered was perhaps 30 years old, plump and pretty with dark hair and a kind face. She rushed to Marlene and embraced her carefully, mindful of her belly. "Marlene, I am so sorry," Clara said. "I just got your letter 2 days ago. The post is so unreliable out here. I would have written back immediately, but I decided it would be faster to just come in person. I have been so worried about you." "How did you find me?" Marlene asked, bewildered. "I told you I was coming to El Paso." "You did, and when you did not arrive, I started asking around. Finally, I talked to a stage driver who remembered putting a pregnant woman off near Shafter. I have been traveling for 3 days to get here." Clara pulled back and looked at her carefully. "Are you all right? What happened?" Marlene told her the whole story, starting from when she had left Fort Worth. Clara's expression grew increasingly horrified. "That driver should be reported," she said angrily when Marlene had finished. "And thank God for this Jacob who found you. Where is he? I want to thank him properly." "He is at work," Marlene said. "He will be back for dinner." "Then I will stay for dinner," Clara said firmly. She looked around the small room. "Is this where you have been living? It is not much." "It is enough," Marlene said, feeling oddly defensive. "Mrs. Patterson has been good to me and I have work. I am not taking charity." "I did not mean it like that," Clara said quickly. "I just meant that you were supposed to come to me. I have a house in El Paso, a real house with extra rooms. My husband and I would be happy to have you, more than happy." Marlene felt torn. A real house sounded wonderful, but it would mean leaving Shafter, leaving Jacob. "I cannot travel right now," she said. The doctor said it is too dangerous this late in my pregnancy. Of course, I understand, Clara said. But after the baby comes in the spring, you could come then. Unless, she paused, looking at Marlene shrewdly, you have a reason to want to stay here. Marlene felt her cheeks heat. I do not know what you mean. I mean this Jacob, Clara said. The way you talk about him, there is something there, is there not? Before Marlene could answer, there was another knock and Jacob's voice came through the door. Marlene, Mrs. Patterson said you have a visitor. Come in, Marlene called. Jacob entered, hat in hand, and stopped when he saw Clara. I am sorry, I did not mean to intrude. You are not intruding, Marlene said. Jacob, this is my cousin Clara Newsome from El Paso. Clara, this is Jacob Quinn, the man I told you about. Clara stood and crossed to Jacob, taking his hand in both of hers. Thank you, she said fervently. Thank you for saving my cousin's life. I do not know how I can ever repay you. Jacob looked embarrassed. No payment needed, madam. I was just doing what anyone would do. Not anyone, Clara said. Most people would not have stopped. Most people would not have cared. But you did, and because of that, Marlene is alive and safe. That is a debt I cannot repay, but I want you to know how grateful I am. I am just glad I was in the right place at the right time, Jacob said. He looked at Marlene. I will leave you two to visit. Actually, Clara said, I was hoping to talk to both of you about Marlene's future. Jacob glanced at Marlene, who nodded. He came in and closed the door, then stood awkwardly near the washstand, clearly uncomfortable. Clara settled back in her chair. Marlene, I came here to bring you back to El Paso with me. That was the plan, and I am still willing to do that, but I can see things are more complicated now. So I need to ask you straight out. What do you want? Marlene looked from Clara to Jacob and back again. What did she want? A month ago, she would have said she just wanted safety and a place to have her baby. But now, her wants had become more specific. She wanted to stay in Shafter. She wanted to keep getting to know Jacob, to see where whatever was developing between them might lead. She wanted a chance at something that felt like it might, someday, become happiness. I want to stay here, she said quietly. At least for now. I have work, I have a safe place to live, and I have friends. She looked at Jacob. I have reasons to stay. Clara followed her gaze and understanding dawned on her face. I see. And you, Mr. Quinn, what are your intentions toward my cousin? Jacob straightened, meeting Clara's eyes directly. Honorable ones, madam. I care about Marlene deeply. I am not sure what the future holds, but I know I want to be part of hers if she will have me. Even with a baby that is not yours, Clara asked bluntly. The baby is part of Marlene, Jacob said simply. How could I care about her and not care about her child? Besides, blood is not the only thing that makes a family. Love matters more. Clara studied him for a long moment, then nodded as if satisfied with what she saw. All right then. Marlene, if you want to stay in Shafter, I will not stand in your way. But promise me that if you need anything, anything at all, you will write to me. And after the baby comes, if you change your mind about El Paso, the offer still stands. Thank you, Clara, Marlene said, feeling tears prick her eyes. Thank you for understanding. I just want you to be happy, Clara said, and safe. Promise me you will be both. I promise, Marlene said. Clara stayed for dinner, and Marlene was pleased to see her cousin get along well with both Jacob and Mrs. Patterson. Over beef stew and fresh bread, they talked and laughed. And for the first time since leaving Fort Worth, Marlene felt like she was part of something, part of a community of people who cared about her. Clara left the next morning, making Marlene promise again to write regularly. As the stage pulled away, Marlene stood on the porch and waved, Jacob beside her. Are you sure you made the right decision? He asked quietly. El Paso might offer you more opportunities. I am sure, Marlene said. She looked up at him. I want to stay here with you." Jacob's face lit up with a smile that made him look years younger. "I am glad," he said simply. Then, daringly, he reached out and took her hand. "I promise you will not regret it." Marlene squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses from his work, the strength in his fingers. "I know I will not." Christmas came, and despite her circumstances, Marlene found herself filled with something that felt almost like joy. Mrs. Patterson decorated the boarding house with pine boughs and red ribbons, and on Christmas Eve, there was a small party for all the boarders. Jacob gave Marlene a hand-carved wooden rattle for the baby, something he had made himself in his spare time. It was beautiful, smooth, and perfectly weighted, and when Marlene held it, she felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I love it," she said. "Jacob, this is the most thoughtful gift anyone has ever given me." "I wanted to give you something that showed I am thinking about the future," Jacob said. "Your future and the baby's future. Our future, I hope." Marlene set the rattle aside carefully and took both his hands in hers. They were in the boarding house parlor, but for a moment it felt like they were alone in the world. "Jacob, I need to tell you something. These past weeks, getting to know you, spending time with you, I have felt myself changing, healing from what happened with Thomas and with my parents. You have shown me that not all men are like him, that there is such a thing as genuine kindness and caring. I do not know if I am ready to call what I feel love, not yet, but it is heading in that direction. And I think you should know that." Jacob's eyes were shining. "That is all I needed to hear," he said softly. "I can wait for the rest. I am a patient man." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but Marlene did not pull away. She let him kiss her, a gentle press of lips that was sweet and careful and full of promise. When they separated, she was smiling. "Merry Christmas, Jacob," she whispered. "Merry Christmas, Marlene," he replied. January arrived with bitter cold and occasional snow, rare for West Texas but not unheard of. Marlene's due date was approaching, and she found herself increasingly nervous. She had never given birth before, had no mother or sisters to guide her, and the reality of what was coming terrified her more than she wanted to admit. Jacob seemed to sense her fear. He made a point of being around more, finding excuses to check on her throughout the day. He brought her books to read, told her stories to distract her, and held her hand when the Braxton Hicks contractions made her gasp. One evening in late January, about a week before the baby was due, they were sitting in her room, Jacob in the chair and Marlene propped up on pillows on the bed. Outside, snow was falling softly and the world felt hushed and peaceful. "I am scared," Marlene admitted suddenly. "About the birth, about being a mother, about everything." Jacob moved from the chair to sit on the edge of the bed. "That is natural," he said. "Any big change is scary. But you are strong, Marlene, stronger than you know. You have survived so much already. You will survive this too." "What if something goes wrong?" she whispered. "What if I die or the baby dies? Women die in childbirth all the time." "Dr. Henderson says you are healthy," Jacob reminded her gently. "And he has delivered hundreds of babies. He knows what he is doing. But even more than that, you have people around you who care about you. Mrs. Patterson has offered to be with you during the birth." "I will be right outside the door. You are not alone, Marlene. You will never be alone again, not if I have anything to say about it." Marlene reached out and touched his face, feeling the scratch of stubble under her palm. "You have been so good to me. I do not know what I did to deserve you." "You do not have to deserve kindness," Jacob said. "It should just be freely given. But if you want my honest opinion, you deserve everything good in this world. You are smart and strong and brave, and any man would be lucky to have you in his life. Even with another man's baby." Marlene asked, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at her. "Especially with another man's baby," Jacob said firmly. Because that baby is part of you and I care about everything that is part of you. When your child is born, I want to be there to help raise them. I want to teach them to ride a horse and to do the right thing even when it is hard. I want to be a father to them if you will let me." Marlene felt tears streaming down her face. "You really mean that?" "I have never meant anything more," Jacob said. He wiped away her tears with his thumbs, his touch infinitely gentle. "I know I have no legal claim to you or your baby. I know I have no right to ask for more than you are ready to give. But my heart is already yours, Marlene, and it has been since that night I found you freezing in the cold. You and the baby both. That is not going to change." "I love you," Marlene said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I did not plan to. I did not think I could after everything that happened, but I do. I love you, Jacob Quinn." Jacob's expression was almost reverent. "Say it again," he breathed. "I love you," Marlene repeated, laughing through her tears. "I love you, I love you, I love you." Jacob kissed her then, and this time there was nothing tentative about it. It was a kiss full of passion and promise of everything they had both been holding back. When they finally separated, both breathless, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "After the baby comes and you have recovered, marry me. Let me be your husband and the baby's father. Let me spend the rest of my life making you happy." "Yes," Marlene said without hesitation. "Yes, Jacob, I will marry you." They held each other as the snow fell outside, two people who had found each other in the wilderness and built something warm and lasting from the cold. 5 days later, on a frigid February morning, Marlene went into labor. It started with a backache that grew steadily worse. Then the contractions began in earnest. Jacob ran to fetch Dr. Henderson while Mrs. Patterson helped Marlene into a clean nightgown and got her settled on the bed with towels underneath. The labor was long and difficult. Marlene had never experienced pain like this, wave after wave of agony that seemed like it would never end. Mrs. Patterson held one hand and wiped her face with a cool cloth, while Dr. Henderson checked her progress and offered quiet encouragement. Through the walls, Marlene could hear Jacob pacing in the hallway, and somehow knowing he was there gave her strength. It was late afternoon when the baby finally came, slipping into the world with a lusty cry that made Marlene sob with relief. Dr. Henderson wrapped the infant in a blanket and laid the baby on Marlene's chest. "You have a son," he said, smiling. "A big, healthy boy. Congratulations, Miss Norton." Marlene looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and perfect, and felt her heart crack open with love so intense it was almost painful. Her son. Her baby. He was real and alive and here. "Can Jacob come in?" she asked Mrs. Patterson. "Of course, dear," Mrs. Patterson said. She went to the door and called down the hall. "Mr. Quinn, you can come in now." Jacob burst through the door, his face pale and anxious. But when he saw Marlene sitting up with the baby in her arms, his expression transformed into pure wonder. He approached slowly as if afraid to intrude and knelt beside the bed. "Is he healthy?" Jacob asked. "Are you all right?" "We are both fine," Marlene assured him. "Look at him, Jacob. Is he not beautiful?" "He is perfect," Jacob breathed. He reached out one finger and gently touched the baby's tiny hand. The infant immediately gripped his finger with surprising strength, and Jacob laughed, a sound of pure delight. "He is strong too. That is a good grip. What will you name him?" Dr. Henderson asked as he packed up his instruments. Marlene looked at Jacob, then back at her son. She had thought about this during her pregnancy, running through names in her mind. But now, looking at Jacob's face as he gazed at the baby, she knew exactly what the name should be. "James," she said. "His name is James Norton." She paused, then added, "Though I hope he will be James Quinn someday soon." Jacob's eyes shot to hers, wide with surprise and joy. You mean that? I mean it, Marlene said. If you still want us, want you? Jacob said, his voice thick with emotion. Marlene, there is nothing in this world I want more. He looked at the baby. James Quinn, that has a fine sound to it. After Dr. Henderson and Mrs. Patterson left, Jacob stayed, sitting on the edge of the bed and simply watching Marlene and the baby. James had fallen asleep, his tiny face peaceful, and Marlene felt exhausted but happier than she could ever remember being. I never thought I could have this, she said softly. A man who loves me, a healthy baby, a future that does not terrify me. 3 months ago, I was convinced my life was over, but you changed everything. You changed everything for me too, Jacob said. Before I met you, I was just drifting, going from job to job with no real direction. But now I have purpose. I want to build a life with you, Marlene. A real life, with a home and stability and all the things my parents had. Tell me about that life, Marlene said drowsily, exhaustion pulling at her. Tell me what you see. Jacob stroked her hair gently. I see us married in the spring, maybe in that little church on Main Street. I see us saving our money and buying a piece of land outside town. Nothing big, just enough for a few horses and maybe some cattle. I see a house, small but sturdy, with a real fireplace and enough rooms for our family. And I see more children, brothers and sisters for James, running around and making noise and filling our lives with love. That sounds wonderful, Marlene murmured, her eyes drifting closed. Sleep, Jacob said softly. I will stay right here and watch over you both. You will always be warm with me, Marlene. Always. As Marlene drifted off to sleep, those words echoed in her mind. You will always be warm with me. It was not just a promise about physical warmth, though that was part of it. It was a promise of safety, of love, of never being alone or cold or frightened again. It was a promise that Jacob had kept every day since that freezing November night, and a promise she knew he would keep for the rest of their lives. The next few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and learning to care for a newborn. James was a good baby, healthy and strong, but he still needed feeding every few hours and seemed to prefer being held to sleeping in his cradle. Marlene did not mind. Every time she looked at her son, she felt overwhelmed with love and gratitude. Jacob helped as much as he could, despite working long hours at the mine. He would come home and take James so Marlene could rest, walking the baby around the room and singing soft songs his mother had taught him. He changed diapers without complaint and got up for the middle-of-the-night feedings, warming the milk Mrs. Patterson kept for them and helping Marlene stay awake while James nursed. The other boarders were kind as well, bringing small gifts for the baby and offering advice. Mrs. Patterson was particularly helpful, having raised 4 children of her own. She taught Marlene practical things, like how to soothe colic and how to tell when the baby was truly sick versus just fussy. Through it all, Jacob's proposal hung in the air between them, acknowledged but not yet acted upon. They had agreed to wait until Marlene was fully recovered from the birth, and Dr. Henderson had said that would take at least 6 weeks. But both of them knew what was coming, and Marlene caught Jacob looking at her sometimes with an expression that made her heart race. In early March, when James was about 5 weeks old and Marlene was feeling almost back to normal, Jacob asked her to take a walk with him. It was a beautiful spring day, warm and clear, with wildflowers beginning to bloom across the plains. Mrs. Patterson agreed to watch James, and Jacob and Marlene set out down Main Street. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, heading toward the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open land. Finally, Jacob led her to a spot on a small rise that overlooked Shafter and the surrounding valley. I wanted to show you something, he said. He pointed to a parcel of land about a mile from town, currently empty except for scrub brush and a few scattered trees. That property is for sale. 20 acres, with a creek running through the back portion. The owner is asking a fair price, and I think I can swing it with my savings and a small loan from the bank. Marlene looked at the land, trying to imagine what Jacob saw. You want to buy it? I want to buy it for us, Jacob corrected. I know we talked about getting married, but I wanted to have something solid to offer you first. A home, not just a room in a boarding house. I have been talking to a carpenter in town, and he says he could build a small house for a reasonable price. Nothing fancy, just 2 bedrooms and a main room with a kitchen. But it would be ours, Marlene, our own place. Marlene felt tears prick her eyes. She seemed to cry at everything these days, her emotions still affected by having given birth. Jacob, you do not have to do this. I would marry you even if all we had was that room at Mrs. Patterson's. I know, Jacob said, but I want to do this. I want to give you and James the best life I can. Will you at least think about it? I do not need to think about it, Marlene said. She turned to face him fully, taking both his hands in hers. I will marry you, Jacob. I will live with you in a house on that land and build a life with you, but not because of the house or the land, because I love you and I cannot imagine my life without you in it. Jacob pulled her close, careful not to crush her, and kissed her soundly. When they separated, he was grinning. So is that a yes? That is a yes, Marlene confirmed, laughing. Then we should set a date, Jacob said. How soon can you be ready? How about April? Marlene suggested. That gives us a month to make arrangements. We can have the ceremony in the church, like you said, and maybe a small gathering afterward at the boarding house. Nothing elaborate, just our friends. April it is, Jacob agreed. I will talk to the Reverend tomorrow and see what date works best. They walked back to town hand in hand, talking about their plans and their future. Jacob would put in his offer on the land and work with the carpenter to start building the house. They would not be able to move in before the wedding, but hopefully within a few months after. In the meantime, they would stay at the boarding house, combining their 2 rooms into one after they married. That evening, they announced their engagement to Mrs. Patterson and the other boarders. There was general excitement and congratulations, and Mrs. Patterson insisted on hosting the post-wedding gathering herself as a gift to them. You two have been a bright spot in this old house, she said, her usually stern face softening. That baby boy, too. It will be my pleasure to help you celebrate. Over the next few weeks, preparations were made. Marlene took her saved wages and bought fabric to make a simple wedding dress, something she could wear again to church on Sundays. Mrs. Patterson helped with the sewing, her skilled fingers making quick work of the seams and hems. Jacob ordered a new suit from the general store's catalog, spending money he probably could not afford, but insisting he wanted to look his best. They wrote to Clara, inviting her to the wedding, and were delighted when she wrote back saying she would be there. Marlene also wrote a letter to her parents, though she did not expect a response. She told them about James, about Jacob, about her new life in Shafter. She said she hoped someday they could forgive her and be part of her life again, but that she was not waiting for their approval anymore. She was moving forward with or without them. As expected, there was no reply, and while that hurt, it did not hurt as much as Marlene had thought it would. She had Jacob and James. She had Mrs. Patterson and Clara and the small community she had built in Shafter. She did not need her parents' blessing to know she was making the right choice. The wedding was set for April 15th, a Saturday afternoon when both Jacob and Marlene could take time off from work. The week before, Jacob finalized the purchase of the land and work began on the house. The carpenter promised it would be finished by midsummer, and Jacob spent every spare moment out there, helping with the construction to save money and speed up the process. Marlene watched him pour himself into building their home and felt her love for him grow even deeper. He was doing this for her, for James, for the family they were creating together. Every nail he hammered, every board he cut and fitted was an act of love. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and warm, perfect spring weather. Marlene woke early with James, feeding him and getting him dressed in the small white gown Mrs. Patterson had sewn for him. Then Clara, who had arrived the night before, helped her into her wedding dress. It was simple white cotton with a high neck and long sleeves, but Marlene thought she had never owned anything more beautiful. "You look radiant," Clara said, adjusting the small veil Marlene had made from leftover fabric. "Jacob is a lucky man." "I am the lucky one," Marlene said. She looked at herself in the small mirror over the washstand, hardly recognizing the woman staring back. She looked happy, truly happy, in a way she had not been since before everything fell apart in Fort Worth. "I never thought I would have this again. Love, marriage, hope for the future. Jacob gave me back all of that." "You gave yourself back," Clara said gently. "Jacob helped, certainly, but you are the one who chose to keep going, to survive, to build a new life. Do not sell yourself short, Marlene." There was a knock at the door, and Mrs. Patterson stuck her head in. "It is time," she said. "Everyone is waiting at the church." The church was small, with only about a dozen pews, but it was packed with people. Word had spread about the wedding, and it seemed half of Shafter had turned out to witness it. Marlene recognized faces from the boarding house, from the general store, from around town. People who had become her friends over the past months, who had welcomed her into their community despite her circumstances. But she barely saw any of them. Her eyes went immediately to Jacob, standing at the front of the church in his new suit, looking nervous and proud and more handsome than she had ever seen him. When he saw her coming down the aisle with Clara at her side and James in her arms, his face transformed with joy. The ceremony was short and simple, exactly what they wanted. Reverend Thomas spoke about love and commitment, about choosing to build a life together in good times and bad. When it came time for the vows, Jacob's voice was strong and clear. "I, Jacob Quinn, take you, Marlene Norton, to be my wife. I promise to love you and cherish you, to provide for you and protect you, all the days of my life. I promise to be a faithful husband to you and a loving father to your son, treating him as my own in every way that matters. This I vow before God and these witnesses." Marlene's own vows were shakier, her voice breaking with emotion, but no less sincere. "I, Marlene Norton, take you, Jacob Quinn, to be my husband. I promise to love you and honor you, to stand by your side through whatever comes. I promise to build a home with you, a life with you, full of love and laughter and hope. This I vow before God and these witnesses." They exchanged simple gold bands, bought with the last of their savings, and when Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, Jacob kissed her with a tenderness that made the entire church sigh. James, held between them, let out a happy gurgle, and everyone laughed. The gathering at the boarding house afterward was joyous and loud, with food and music and endless congratulations. Marlene danced with Jacob, carefully since she was still holding James and felt like she was floating. This was her wedding day. This was her husband. This was her family. Late in the evening, after most of the guests had left, and James had been put to bed in the cradle in what was now officially their room, Jacob and Marlene stood on the boarding house porch, looking out at the star-filled sky. "How does it feel to be Mrs. Jacob Quinn?" Jacob asked, his arm around her waist. "It feels like coming home," Marlene said simply. "Like everything I went through, all the pain and fear and uncertainty, it was all leading me to this moment. To you. I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." Jacob promised. I could never regret you, Marlene said. She looked up at him, this man who had saved her life and stolen her heart. You kept your promise, you know. That first night when you built the fire and told me I would always be warm with you. I am warm now, Jacob, not just physically, but in every way that matters. You have given me warmth and love and safety. You have given me everything. Jacob cupped her face in his hands and kissed her slowly, deeply, a kiss that promised all the years to come. And you have given me a reason to build instead of just drift, a family to love and protect, a future worth planning for. You have given me everything, too. They stood there together as the night deepened, holding each other and dreaming of the life they would build together. Summer arrived, and with it, the completion of their house. It was small, as Jacob had promised, but sturdy and well-built, with glass windows and a real stone fireplace. The first night they spent there, Marlene walked through the rooms, marveling that this was hers, theirs, a place that belonged to them and no one else. Jacob had built a cradle for James from salvaged wood, and he placed it in the smaller bedroom that would be the nursery. In the main room, he had constructed a table and chairs, and Mrs. Patterson had given them an old rocking chair as a housewarming present. It was not much, but it was enough. Over the following months they settled into married life. Jacob continued working at the mine, and Marlene took in sewing and laundry from women in town who were willing to pay for the service. Between them, they made enough to live simply but comfortably. They bought a cow for milk, some chickens for eggs, and Jacob started work on a small barn and corral for the horses he planned to eventually acquire. James grew and thrived, learning to sit up, then crawl, then pull himself up on furniture. He was a happy baby, quick to smile, and both Marlene and Jacob doted on him shamelessly. Jacob never once treated James as anything other than his son, and James, too young to know the difference, called him Da as soon as he could form words. On a cool November evening, almost exactly a year after Jacob had found Marlene freezing in the wilderness, they sat together in front of their fireplace, watching the flames dance. James was asleep in his cradle, and the house was peaceful and warm. You ever think about that night? Marlene asked, her head resting on Jacob's shoulder. The night we met, all the time, Jacob admitted. I think about what might have happened if I had decided to camp somewhere else, or if I had been too tired to investigate when I thought I heard something. I think about how close I came to never meeting you. I think about it too, Marlene said. I was so cold, Jacob, so tired and scared and alone. I thought I was going to die out there, and then you appeared like an answer to a prayer I had been too exhausted to even say. You know what I remember most about that night, Jacob said. Not how cold it was or how scared you looked. What I remember is the moment I got the fire going and I looked at you, and something in my heart just knew. I knew you were important. I knew my life had just changed. I did not understand it then, but I do now. What do you mean? Marlene asked. I mean that my whole life led me to that exact spot at that exact time, Jacob said. Every decision I made, every job I took or did not take, every road I chose to travel, it all led me to you. And I would do it all again, every hardship and disappointment if it meant ending up here in this house with you and James. Marlene felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were happy tears. I love you so much, she whispered. Sometimes I feel like my heart is going to burst with it. I love you too, Jacob said, more than I ever knew it was possible to love someone. He pulled back to look at her, and there was something in his expression, a mix of hope and nervousness. Marlene, I want to ask you something. What is it? How would you feel about having another baby? I know James is still young and I do not want to rush you, but I would love to have more children with you. A big family like my parents had. Marlene smiled through her tears. I would love that too, James needs brothers and sisters to play with. And I want more of this, more nights like tonight, more love filling this house until the walls can barely contain it. Jacob kissed her, long and sweet, and the fire crackled beside them, filling the room with warmth and light. Later, they would put another log on the fire and go to bed, wrapped in each other's arms. Later, they would make love and dream together about the future, about the children they would have and the life they would continue to build. But for now, they simply held each other, grateful for the journey that had brought them together, for the cold November night that had changed everything, for the promise Jacob had made and kept every day since. You will always be warm with me. It was more than a promise. It was a vow, a commitment, a love that would last all their lives. And as the fire burned bright and the night settled around their small house on the Texas plains, Marlene knew with absolute certainty that she was home. The years that followed were full and rich, marked by both challenges and joys. True to their hopes, Marlene became pregnant again the following spring, and in December of 1886, she gave birth to a daughter they named Julia. She had Jacob's blue eyes and Marlene's dark hair, and from the moment she was born, she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. James was a good big brother, gentle with the baby and eager to help. At 3 years old, he was old enough to understand that Julia was his sister, though he did not understand the complicated circumstances of his own birth. To him, Jacob was simply his father, and Marlene and Jacob agreed that was exactly as it should be. When James was older, they would tell him the truth, but for now, he was just a happy child with a loving family. Jacob's dream of having a small horse ranch was slowly becoming reality. He had left his job at the mine and was building a reputation as someone who could break and train horses better than anyone else in the region. Ranchers from across West Texas began bringing him their horses, and the money from that work was better than what he had made at the mine. He hired a young man from town to help him, and together they expanded the corral and built a proper barn. Marlene continued taking in sewing, but as the children grew and demanded more of her time, she gradually did less outside work and focused more on managing the household and helping Jacob with the business. She kept the books, negotiated prices with the ranchers, and made sure everything ran smoothly. They made a good team, each complementing the other's strengths. In 1889, their second daughter was born, a tiny thing they named Grace. She was colicky and difficult, keeping them up night after night with her crying, but neither Jacob nor Marlene minded. They took turns walking her, singing to her, doing whatever it took to soothe her. Eventually, she outgrew the colic and became a sweet, quiet child who preferred books to playing outside. Throughout all of this, Marlene never heard from her parents. She had continued to send them letters for the first few years, updating them on her life and including small sketches of the grandchildren they were missing. But there was never any response, and eventually, Marlene stopped writing. It hurt, knowing her parents had chosen their pride over their daughter and grandchildren, but she had her own family now, and they filled her life so completely that there was little room left for grief over what might have been. Clara visited as often as she could, usually once a year, and she and Marlene maintained a close relationship through letters. She had become like a sister to Marlene, and her children adored their Aunt Clara, who always brought presents and told exciting stories about life in El Paso. Mrs. Patterson remained a constant presence in their lives as well. She had become like a grandmother to the children, often inviting them to stay with her in town, so Jacob and Marlene could have a night to themselves. As she grew older and more frail, they began to worry about her, and finally, Jacob suggested she sell the boarding house and come live with them. She refused at first, insisting she did not want to be a burden, but eventually she agreed, and they converted the small room off the kitchen into a bedroom for her. Having her in the house was a blessing. She helped with the children and the cooking, and her presence added another layer of love and warmth to their home. James, Julia, and Grace loved her fiercely, and she doted on them with the affection of someone who had missed her own children and grandchildren, scattered as they were across the country. In 1892, Marlene became pregnant again, and this time she gave birth to twin boys. They named them Samuel and Thomas, and the house suddenly felt very full and very loud. But Jacob just laughed and said he had always wanted a big family, and now he had one. 5 children, ranging from baby twins to 10-year-old James, kept them busy from sunup to sundown, but neither Marlene nor Jacob would have changed a thing. One evening in late autumn of 1893, after the children had been put to bed and Mrs. Patterson had retired to her room, Jacob and Marlene sat together on the porch they had added to the front of the house. It was their favorite time of day, these quiet moments when they could simply be together, watching the sun set over the land they had built their life on. "Do you remember what today is?" Jacob asked, his arm around her shoulders. Marlene thought for a moment, then smiled. "It is the anniversary of the night we met. 7 years ago today you found me freezing in the cold." 7 years, Jacob marveled. "It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago, all at once." "So much has changed," Marlene said. "When I think about who I was then, frightened and alone and convinced my life was over, and I compare her to who I am now, it is hard to believe I am the same person." "You are not the same person," Jacob said. "You have grown and changed, become even stronger than you already were, but the core of who you are, that has never changed. You are still the brave woman who kept walking even when she was exhausted. Still the loving mother who would do anything for her children. Still the woman I fell in love with by firelight." Marlene leaned into him, breathing in the familiar scent of him, horses and leather and home. "And you are still the man who built a fire and promised I would always be warm with you." "You have kept that promise every single day, Jacob, not just by keeping me physically warm, but by filling my life with so much love that I could never feel cold or alone again." "That is all I ever wanted," Jacob said softly. "To give you and our children a good life, to build something lasting." "You have done that," Marlene assured him. "Look at what we have built together. This house, this ranch, our family. It is more than I ever dreamed possible." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky turn from orange to purple to deep blue. Stars began to appear, the same stars that had shone down on them that first night, and Marlene felt a profound sense of gratitude for the path that had led her here. "You ever regret it?" Jacob asked suddenly. "Staying in Shafter instead of going to El Paso? Choosing this life instead of something else?" "Never," Marlene said without hesitation. "This is exactly where I am supposed to be, with you, with our children on this land. This is my home, Jacob. You are my home." Jacob kissed the top of her head. "I am glad. Because I cannot imagine my life without you in it. These 7 years have been the best of my life, and I am looking forward to 50 more just like them." "Only 50, Marlene teased. "I was hoping for at least 60. Jacob laughed, that warm, genuine laugh she loved so much. "60 it is, then. 60 more years of noisy children and ranch work and sitting on this porch together watching the sunset." "That sounds perfect," Marlene said. Inside, one of the twins started crying, and they could hear Mrs. Patterson's voice, soothing and gentle, settling him back down. The sounds of their family, of the life they had built together, filled the night air. "We should probably go in," Jacob said reluctantly. "Make sure she does not need help." "In a minute," Marlene said. Just one more minute out here with you." They sat together as the stars multiplied overhead, two people who had found each other in the darkness and built a life filled with light. The fire Jacob had built that first night had never gone out. It burned in their home, in their hearts, in the love they shared and passed on to their children. As they finally stood to go inside, Jacob took Marlene's hand and squeezed it gently. She squeezed back, a silent communication that needed no words. They had weathered storms together and celebrated joys. They had built a home from nothing and filled it with love. They had kept their promises to each other, through good times and hard times, through every season of their lives together. And they would continue to do so for all the years to come, warming each other against whatever cold winds might blow, secure in the knowledge that together they were home. The children grew, as children do. James became a serious, thoughtful young man who loved working with his father and the horses. When he turned 18, Jacob officially signed over a portion of the ranch to him, and James began building his own small house on the property, preparing for the day when he would bring a wife home. Julia grew into a beautiful, spirited girl who could ride as well as any cowboy and had a gift with animals that rivaled her father's. Grace remained the quiet one, always with a book in hand, but she had a sharp mind and a kind heart that made her beloved by everyone who knew her. The twins were wild and mischievous, keeping everyone on their toes, but they were good boys at heart, quick to help and slow to complain. Mrs. Patterson lived with them for 5 more years before passing away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78. The whole family mourned her, and they buried her in the Shafter Cemetery with a headstone that read, "Beloved friend and grandmother." She had been such an integral part of their lives that the house felt empty without her. But her legacy lived on in the children she had helped raise and the love she had given so freely. Through it all, Jacob and Marlene remained each other's anchor and safe harbor. They had disagreements, as any couple does, but they always worked through them with honesty and respect. They supported each other's dreams and comforted each other's sorrows. They laughed together and cried together and built a partnership that grew stronger with each passing year. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Jacob surprised Marlene with a trip to San Antonio, just the two of them. It was the first time they had been away from the ranch and children together, and they spent 3 glorious days exploring the city, staying in a real hotel and simply enjoying each other's company. On their last night there, as they walked along the river in the moonlight, Jacob stopped and pulled Marlene close. 20 years, he said wonderingly. How did we get so lucky? It was not luck, Marlene said. It was choice. Every day we choose each other. We choose love over anger, forgiveness over resentment, together over apart. That is not luck, Jacob. That is work and commitment and love. You are right, as always, Jacob said with a smile, but I still feel lucky. Lucky that I decided to camp where I did that November night. Lucky that I heard you and went to investigate. Lucky that you were brave enough to trust me, to let me into your life, to build something beautiful with me. I feel lucky too, Marlene admitted. Lucky that you were the kind of man who would stop to help a stranger. Lucky that you saw past my circumstances to the person I was inside. Lucky that you loved not just me but James as well, treating him like your own from the very beginning. He is my own, Jacob said firmly. Blood does not make a father, love does. James is my son in every way that matters, just like Julia and Grace and Samuel and Thomas are. They are all our children, and I love them all equally. I know you do, Marlene said, tears glistening in her eyes. That is just one of the many reasons I love you. They stood together by the river, 2 people who had weathered 2 decades of life together and come out stronger for it. The journey had not always been easy. There had been hard years when money was tight, when the children were sick, when drought threatened the ranch. There had been moments of doubt and fear and frustration. But through it all, they had held fast to each other and to the love that had brought them together. As they grew older, their roles gradually shifted. James took over more and more of the ranch work, and eventually, Jacob semi-retired, content to offer advice and help with special projects but no longer doing the day-to-day labor. Julia married a good man from a neighboring ranch, and they settled nearby, giving Marlene and Jacob their first grandchild, a little girl named Marlene after her grandmother. Grace surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to become a teacher, and she moved to Austin to attend normal school. The twins showed no signs of settling down, content to work the ranch and enjoy their bachelor lives. Through all these changes, Marlene and Jacob remained the heart of the family. Their home was the gathering place for Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations. Their wisdom was sought when problems arose. Their love was the foundation upon which the entire family was built. One evening, in early November of 1910, 24 years after they had first met, Marlene and Jacob sat together in the rocking chairs on their porch. They were both in their 50s now, with gray in their hair and lines on their faces, but to each other, they were still as beautiful as they had been that first night. The sun was setting in its usual spectacular display of color, and from inside the house came the sounds of Julia visiting with her 3 children, filling the rooms with noise and laughter. "Another November," Marlene said softly. "Another anniversary of the night that changed everything." 24 years, Jacob marveled. Where did the time go? "Into building this," Marlene said, gesturing to encompass not just the house but everything they had created. "Into raising our children and building our ranch and living our lives. It went into all the good things, Jacob." "No regrets?" he asked, as he did every year on this date. "Not a single one," Marlene said, as she always did. "You?" "Only that we do not have another 24 years ahead of us," Jacob said. "I want more time with you, Marlene. I want to see our grandchildren grow up and meet our great-grandchildren. I want 100 more evenings just like this one." "Then we will have them," Marlene said with determination. "As many as God grants us, we will make each one count." Jacob reached over and took her hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "Do you remember what I told you that first night, when I built the fire? You told me I would always be warm with you," Marlene said. "I meant it then, and I mean it now," Jacob said. "You will always be warm with me, Marlene. In this life and whatever comes after, my heart is yours now and forever." "And mine is yours," Marlene replied. "You saved my life that night, Jacob, but you did more than that. You gave me back my hope, my future, my ability to love and trust. You gave me a family and a home and a life worth living. I could never repay that debt." "There is no debt," Jacob said firmly. "Love does not keep score. Love just gives and gives and gives, and somehow the more you give, the more you have. That is what you have taught me, Marlene. How to love without limits or conditions. How to give myself fully to another person and trust that they will treasure what I give them." "I do treasure it," Marlene whispered. "Every moment with you is a gift I never take for granted." They sat together as the sun slipped below the horizon and the stars began to appear. Inside, they could hear Julia calling the children to wash up for dinner. Soon, they would go inside and join the family, eating and laughing and enjoying each other's company. But for now, they savored these quiet moments, just the two of them, remembering where they had started and marveling at where they had ended up. 24 years ago, Marlene had been alone and freezing, convinced her life was over. 24 years ago, Jacob had been drifting, searching for something he could not quite name. That cold November night had brought them together, two lost souls who found in each other everything they had been looking for. From that single act of kindness, from one man building a fire for a pregnant stranger and promising she would always be warm with him, had grown this entire life. A marriage built on love and respect, children raised with care and devotion. A ranch carved out of wilderness through hard work and determination. A family bound together by ties of affection stronger than blood. It was more than either of them had ever dreamed possible on that freezing night when they first met. But dreams have a way of growing when they are tended with love, and Jacob and Marlene had tended their dreams well. As the stars multiplied overhead and the evening air grew cool, they stood and walked inside together, arms around each other's waists. The house was warm and bright, filled with the voices of people they loved. This was their legacy, built not on wealth or fame but on love and commitment and the simple act of one person caring for another. They would have many more years together, blessed years filled with grandchildren and quiet contentment. They would rock grandbabies to sleep and tell stories about the old days. They would watch the ranch continue to grow and prosper under James's careful management. They would see Grace become a beloved teacher, shaping young minds in Austin. They would eventually watch the twins settle down with wives of their own, filling the ranch with even more children and laughter. Through it all, they would remain what they had always been to each other, partners, lovers, best friends. The fire Jacob built that first night never went out. It burned in their hearth, yes, but more importantly, it burned in their hearts, keeping them warm through every season of their lives. And when their time finally came, many years later, they would go together, content in the knowledge that they had lived well and loved deeply. Their children and grandchildren would tell stories about them, about the cowboy who found a freezing pregnant girl and built her a fire, about the promise he made and kept for a lifetime. Those stories would be passed down through generations, a legacy of love that would outlive them both. But that was still far in the future. For now, on this November evening 24 years after that fateful night, Jacob and Marlene Quinn were simply happy. They were warm, not just from the fire burning in their hearth, but from the love that surrounded them on all sides. They were home in every sense of the word, and they were exactly where they belonged, together, the end.